Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Now, one question I often get asked is this. Michael, what is the question you most get asked about ships? And it's true, people do come up if they recognize me and they ask me questions about ships, but people are most interested in what other people are asking about ships. If it sounds confusing, it's really not. There are some really interesting facts and things that may seem simple to some, like, for example, why do ships float? Why are ships painted red on the underside? Things like that. And they're not obviously apparent answers if you really sit down and think about it. We've already covered a lot of these topics on the channel before, but we've done them in little individual videos. And today, just while I'm on vacation, we thought we might do something fun and kind of combine them all in together into a sort of supercut compilation of all of the fun and interesting questions that I always get asked the most about ships. If you feel like listening to me talking about ships for the next hour or so, then I cordially invite you to sit back with your favorite beverage, potentially a lemonade or a nice iced coffee, because it's quite hot here, and enjoy 5 of the most commonly asked questions about ships. You know, one of the really interesting things about classic ocean liners like the Titanic or the Queen Mary is just how much of the ship sits underwater. This is known as the ship's draft, the distance from the waterline to the keel, the ship's backbone. Queen Mary had an incredible 39-foot or almost 12-meter draft. That's about the height of a 3-story building. But one thing you might have noticed in pictures and paintings is the striking color, red. We all know, even subconsciously, that ships seem to always be painted red below the waterline. But why? I mean, ships exist at sea. Why not paint it blue or green or something nautical? Is it to hide rust or some kind of weird ages-old tradition that's still followed blindly today? Well, it's an interesting story, or at least I think it is. So sit back and relax as I, your friend, Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs, explain why ships are painted red. Waves can run stories tall and strip the paint from bare steel. Salt crusts and deposits rusts anything that isn't painted and turns it brown. Seawater rots wood and fabric. It's a harsh, unfriendly environment, but a select few mad humans have been going out to the sea for centuries. The mariner, a strange specimen of humankind, seems to enjoy this bizarre kind of lifestyle, so when they set out to sea like their ancestors did back in the 1500s through to the 1800s, their ships were fairly simple. They relied on the wind to get their speed, but they were made out of timber. Fairly dense and reliable timber too, like oak, teak or mahogany. But old-timey shipbuilders encountered a few unique problems. See, getting across the ocean as quickly as possible was a big deal in the centuries before steam engines and airplanes, so every single bit of speed that could be squeezed out of a ship's design was paramount. Pretty early on, sailors realized that ships sitting in harbors waiting to be loaded or overhauled began to gather unwanted inhabitants. Yes, of course there were rats, but below the waterline something strange was happening. Seaweed, barnacles, and thick marine growth began to build up on the ship's hull. Aesthetically speaking, nobody really cared, but it had a huge impact on the ship's speed. With clumps of marine growth on the hull, the ship couldn't as easily slice through the water. It would slow down. So ships had to regularly be scraped clean of these unwanted hitchhikers. It was a problem back in 1600, and it remains a problem today. It's hilarious to think that with all these years of technological advancement, even in the golden age of the ocean liner, the mammoth luxury ships like Queen Mary had to be regularly docked and scraped clean. But in the days of sail, it wasn't just marine growth that had to be stopped. The ship itself had to be protected from being eaten away. Shipworms are a nasty little thing, technically a kind of mollusk that eats ships, specifically the wood that was used to build them. Back in the day, sailing ships were made of timber, and over time, these little critters would burrow in and do some serious damage. The ancient Greeks had this issue. Their fancy wooden ships were being eaten away below the waterline, so they started attaching lead plates for protection, but by the days of sail, lead in contact with iron bolts would cause galvanic corrosion, so something else had to be used. The answer was copper, and sailing ships had thin copper plates nailed onto their wooden hulls. The copper could be easily replaced, and the ships would still need to be dry docked for scraping to get all those nasty barnacles off, but at least now shipworms had been mostly defeated. And that's why, in a lot of paintings and pictures, ships from the golden age of sail either have a golden colour at their waterline or kind of like a milky green colour, because as copper ages in water, it turns green. Nowadays, shipwrecks from that period often have their wood long gone, eaten away by sea creatures and bacteria, and all that's left behind is the copper sheathing that once would have protected it. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked as usual. By the time iron and steel-hulled ships had come along, the copper sheathing wasn't necessary anymore because shipworm can't burrow into metal. But using metal hulls presented new and exciting challenges for ships builders and operators. For one thing, marine growth was still a thing, but now ships were getting bigger and bigger, and scraping them would have to be a less common occurrence. Not only that, but steel and iron rust. They corrode in water, which means an unprotected hull would be eaten away and the ship could sink. The answer was very simple, and any ex-Navy personnel watching this can confirm that the old adage is, if it's rusted, you paint it. But paint it with what? You can't just use something like a house paint. That stuff would be stripped right off by the water. No, a special kind of thick, protective paint would need to be used, and one was developed that could serve two special purposes. And guess what color it was? It was back in 1865 when a chap named Heinrich Ratjen from Germany patented a paint formula that was designed specifically to protect the underside of ships' hulls. By this point, iron-hulled ships were everywhere, and a number of formulas had been put forward to varying degrees of success, as many as 300 of them. But Ratjen's mixture would be in use from 1865 for decades, and it wasn't just any ordinary old kind of paint, because its 10th ingredient was arsenic. Ratjen's formula used these ingredients: wood alcohol or methylated spirits, shellac, thick turpentine, linseed oil, common rosin, which is a kind of resin, gallipot, which is another kind of resin, tar spirit, tallow, Venetian red, remember this one, arsenic, zinc oxide, and mercury oxide. Now, those are some pretty serious ingredients. Using shellac and two kinds of resin meant that the paint would be insanely hardy once allowed to dry and set in place, and the arsenic and mercury oxide would make the paint toxic to marine life. Barnacles and marine growth wouldn't accumulate because they'd be poisoned. Over time, the paint would need to be touched up, of course, but it would mean ships' undersides would need to be scraped way less often. It's that 9th ingredient, though, Venetian red, that gave the formula its colour. Venetian red is a pigment, the colour of paint, that dates back to ancient times for one simple reason: it's naturally occurring. It's made from iron oxide that you can find in rocks. Because of that, it is insanely abundant and crazy cheap to make. It's been used in everything from cave paintings to medieval art. In the 1600s, the British Army began to use it to dye their jackets for easy identification in battle. This was the birth of the infamous redcoats, a tradition that continues to this day. Venetian red is extremely durable. The whole point of the paint formula was durability, after all. The ships would be expected to go many months in between dry docking and repainting, so the paint had to last. The formula, the mixture of durable pigments and oxides, resulted in a red paint that protected the ships from corrosion and marine growth and greatly increased their durability, and this special paint was called anti-fouling. So now you have a striking colour that is born out of necessity, but pretty soon it becomes tradition. Ships' hulls just become red. Some companies even begin to use it as a branding tool. Despite the hardiness of the paint, the waterline around a ship is an area of a lot of action. Tugboats, lighters, and tenders, they all bump and scrape along the ship's hull. Very often, in the golden days of ocean liners, that area ended up looking like a real mess. The Cunard Line didn't like this about their ships in the late 1800s. They wanted theirs to look the smartest in the world, so they introduced a thing called a boot topping. A boot topping is an added layer of paint in any colour that sits on top of the anti-fouling because it looks good. Anti-fouling on ships isn't a bright red, it's a kind of dull, rusty colour. But Cunard Line wanted their ships to look special, so they introduced a bright red boot topping with a thin white line. On photos of their ships in dry dock, you can just see where the anti-fouling ends and the boot topping begins. They emphasise this in their postcards and their posters with bright red waterlines and smart Cunard red funnels. The ships looked very smart indeed. This is a tradition that Cunard continues to this day. Queen Mary 2, the only operational ocean liner in the world, sails with a bright red boot topping sitting on top of her anti-foul. Other ships have used some strange boot topping colours. At one point, the Queen Elizabeth II had a blue boot topping, which the public hated so much that Cunard Line changed it right back to red. In the 50s and 60s, Orient Line's ships used a green boot topping. Hell, most cruise ships today show a blue boot topping at the waterline. You might think the whole underside is blue, but it's just for looks. Get the cruise ship in dry dock, and most of the time you'll find it's all an illusion, and the underside is that same old dull red. Of course, nowadays there are so many pigments and choices that a ship's anti-foul can really be painted any colour. But using a naturally occurring pigment like Venetian red is the cheapest option, and after all, why break with tradition? Of course, using arsenic in modern day anti-foul is generally frowned upon. There are a whole host of biocides used in anti-fouling of modern ships, poisons designed to kill marine growth before it can grow on the hull. Occasionally though, a biocide is deemed too harmful and it's banned. This year, a biocide called cybertrine was banned in ships because studies found that it was building up and was, surprise surprise, extremely toxic to marine animals and organisms. Nowadays, organic biocides are preferred, but it's shocking what we've put into the ocean in the quest to prevent our ships from rusting. Everything from heavy metals to lead and arsenic to the pesticide DDT. So why are ships red? Well, because it's cheap, it's durable, and now it's a tradition. After all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Headlights. They help us drive our cars and our bikes at night, lighting up the path ahead for safe navigation. Illuminating the darkness can help us avoid all kinds of hazards. In fact, miners have used head torches for decades for the same reason. But what about ships? Many have encountered disaster and danger at sea, most famously the RMS Titanic, which struck an iceberg on an unusually dark and still night in April 1912. Even then, at the subsequent inquiry, the question was asked, would a large torch have helped the situation? Why don't ships have headlights like cars? It was a freezing cold night when RMS Titanic's lookouts, high up on the mast and the crow's nest platform, spotted the iceberg ahead. In fact, they didn't even really see it, rather they described it as a lack of stars against the sky. It was so dark that the berg just blended right in to the sky and sea ahead. With just over 30 seconds to react, the crew tried to get the ship out of harm's way, but it was too late. Shortly after the ship had sunk, in New York City, the first inquiry was chaired by a US Senator, William Alden Smith, and he asked many of the crew and passengers what they thought had happened. Two of the ship's officers testified that if they'd had a spotlight that night of some kind, it would have helped them sight the berg sooner. And the thing is, it was an unusually dark night. Moonless, as they say, when the moon is hidden by the Earth's shadow and blacked out. Coupled with the rare calm, where the water was as flat as a garden pond, the crew stood very little chance of spotting the iceberg in the first place. Ice can be seen from far away when there's a moon. The light will reflect off its white surface, but if there's no moon, then the waves lapping at the berg's base can be spotted too. So, would a spotlight have helped? The chances are that the officers are right, and that yes, in those unusual, specific conditions, a spotlight might have helped them. But the truth is that powerful lights like that mounted on the front of the ship can be more dangerous than they are useful. Ship's crew rely on their eyesight for safe operating of their ships at sea, and they've done that for centuries. Lookouts were prized, in the days of sail, for their excellent vision. A skilled lookout could spot a ship on the horizon and then determine its type and home nation when, to you or I, it might have looked like a small white speck. At night, lookouts were employed to keep an eye out for tiny signs of friend, foe, or danger. The slight flicker of a lantern off in the distance, for example, or if the navigation was completely off, the telltale roar and white foam of breaking waves on the shore ahead. For this, lookouts needed excellent night vision, the ability to pierce through the darkness and discern what it was that they were looking at. By Titanic's day, and even today, things had not changed much. Sharp vision is still very much prized, but so is night vision. Being able to figure out what you're seeing ahead or to the side of you at night is absolutely paramount for a few reasons. First, for navigation. Beacons and buoys floating on the surface mark crucial channels and water lanes like highways, where ships of different types and sizes should sail. Seeing them through the dark will ensure safe passage, but if you miss their telltale location, the ship may be headed for disaster. The running lights of other ships at night are critical as well. Ships have lights positioned in specific locations to help identify which direction they're heading in. The port, or left side of a ship by the bridge, has a red light, and the starboard, or right-hand side of the ship, has a green one. And then another light is positioned way up high in the ship's mast or antenna. From a distance then, other ships can see what direction you're heading in. For example, if you can see just red, then the ship is heading right to left. But if you can see all three of those lights at the same time, then the ship's heading directly at you. But if the ship had big spotlights fitted like the headlights of a car, suddenly the night's darkness ahead would be made murky by the powerful spotlights. You couldn't make anything out. The crew's night vision would be ruined, and nothing could be seen at all. Channel markers or other ships' lights might go unnoticed, leading to disaster. It's the same situation when it comes to obstacles or dangerous conditions ahead. A searchlight on the bow of a ship might only be useful for a few rare times in a ship's life. If it was on all the time, it would be a massive headache for the crew who are trying to see way ahead of their ship. Night vision is so prized that on liners of Titanic's day, anything forward of the bridge was blacked out. Lights either were shielded or turned off to preserve night vision ahead. Titanic was actually fitted with deck lamps all over the upper decks to provide 360 degrees of ambient light, but the ones closest to the bridge were fitted with a shroud so that the light couldn't shine forward and ruin the crew's night vision. Night vision was so prized, in fact, that the Titanic's helmsman, who was the man actually at the steering wheel or helm of the ship, was kept in a special room called the wheelhouse, which was then fitted with shutters so that the light of the room wouldn't spill into the main navigating bridge and ruin the crew's night vision. On modern passenger ships, the conditions are actually the same. One of the most quiet, dark places at sea on a big cruise ship is right at the front towards the bow, where things are kept in the dark. But of course, on the bridge of a ship, you still need to see what you're doing, so red light can be used to light areas up without ruining night vision. So it's often used, especially on warships and submarines, to preserve crucial night vision for the crew. But spotlights and searchlights on ships have come in very handy indeed. In fact, contemporary ships to Titanic were built with a kind of headlight. It's likely that on the night of Titanic's sinking, even a low-powered spotlight mounted near the bow might have helped illuminate the iceberg earlier. But in deciding to use it in the first place, the crew would have surely been extremely nervous at having their night vision ruined by the light. If Titanic was actually fitted with a searchlight, I doubt they'd have even used it at all, because that night's conditions would probably have been one of the absolute few and rare times it might have ever come in handy. Another time might have been in the fog. If a ship is surrounded by dense fog, lighting the way forward with a spotlight might, at the very least, warn other ships in the immediate vicinity of your presence. This, and the Titanic's recent loss, must have been front of mind to Albert Berlin and the designers of the German ocean liner Imperator in 1912. The ship was designed and built in Germany, and featured a very prominent carbon arc spotlight on the forward mast, a huge thing almost level with the bridge. Carbon arc lamps are extremely powerful things. They're actually the types of light that are used in the spotlights that you see from the World Wars. Imperator probably received her spotlight to reassure passengers more than anything else. It's unknown if the thing was ever used because, of course, sailors trusted and preferred their night vision. Imperator and her sister Vaterland are two of the only liners I can think of that sported this kind of light. But recently I came across this beautiful painting by maritime artist Kenneth Shoesmith, who is an absolute legend of his craft. It shows the British liner Asturias transiting the Suez Canal in the 1920s, and shining out of the actual bow or front end of the ship is something you could almost certainly describe as a headlight. This is an example of a Suez light, lights fitted to ships specifically for transiting through the Suez Canal. Now, it's such a narrow body of water that one wrong move could result in stuck ships. So seeing ahead in the days before radar technology was crucial for safe navigation here. And in fact, ships to this day are still fitted with searchlights specifically for this one purpose if they are expected to navigate their way through the Suez. Spotlights are extremely useful on ships, but not just for lighting the way ahead. You'll see them mounted on warships to this day, extraordinarily powerful things. They can do two things. First, they can flash signals to friendly ships when using the radio might be inadvisable. And secondly, they can shine into the darkness and around the ship and light up any potential hostile threats in case they're sneaking in close to engage. In the Second World War, the naval battle of Guadalcanal was fought at night time, and it was a complete shambles, with examples of friendly fire in the confusion. But crucially, searchlights were used to illuminate enemy targets in the dark and guide the heavy gunfire. The Japanese destroyer Akatsuki and the battleship Hiei used their massive carbon arc lights to illuminate the American cruiser Atlanta at almost point-blank range, but it had an unintended effect. The light revealed the Japanese ship's positions, and Akatsuki found herself marked out as an easy target. She was engaged by 6 American ships who could see her in the dark, and she was smashed with gunfire, and she blew up shortly after. So clearly, using spotlights at sea can have unintended consequences both in peace and wartime. So how do ships see in the dark today safely? Well, it turns out that we actually have a piece of technology that is more effective at piercing through the darkness than the human eyeball. Radar relies on electromagnetic waves, sending pulses which are reflected by objects ahead, sent back, and mapped out in clear vision, be it day or night. With this, a modern ship could spot anything well ahead, and in fact, modern-day vessels carry different types of radar for different uses and distances. If Titanic was carrying a radar, her crew would have sighted the iceberg from miles away. In fact, modern radar can sight targets from 24 nautical miles or over 40 kilometers distance. It's estimated that Titanic's crew only spotted the iceberg from about 1,500 feet, or just shy of 500 meters. An interesting exception to the headlight situation at sea are icebreakers, amazing ships that we actually covered in an earlier video, but these beasts are fitted with powerful searchlights all over them, because unlike a normal ship, they are actually expected to be in contact with the ice and obstacles while they slowly steam ahead, so the crew really need to see what they're doing. So why don't ships have headlights? Well, some do, but it turns out for the vast majority, the human eyeball is just as good. We know that from history, lookouts prioritize their night vision over any kind of artificial light that might be able to help them see a little bit further ahead. In war, they were useful for signaling to friendly ships, but using them in battle could be extremely dangerous. And as for ships today, we don't really need to light the way ahead. Radar does it for us, seeing many miles into the distance for us and keeping our modern shipping safe. If you've ever seen a photo of an old ship like Titanic, you'll probably notice how smooth and straight the front of the ship is, like it's designed to cut easily through the water. But modern ships look, well, different. They have a strange, alien-looking protrusion jutting out in front of them. This is called the bulbous bow, and this thing is designed to drastically reduce drag as the ship moves through the water. But how? You'd think that adding a whole structure to that nice, knife-like edge would ruin the whole thing, but weirdly, the engineering oddity results in a faster, more efficient ride. Ships have looked very similar for centuries. Now, there are a few guiding principles that outline the way that a ship should be designed and built that our seafaring ancestors had first figured out when they went to sea all those centuries ago. Obviously, to get the most speed out of a boat or ship, it had to be smooth or streamlined. Now, this led to the study of hydrodynamics at sea, how objects interact with the water and actually move through it. Refining hydrodynamics took place through the centuries, and ships became sleeker and faster because of it. By the mid-1800s, the basic shape of a ship's hull had been established, and that would remain largely unchanged for decades to come. Now, it's not as simple as it sounds. A ship has to be stable, so it needs to be large and broad, but it also has to be fast, so it needs to be long and sleek. Engineers found a strong balance with the T-clippers and merchant barks of the 1800s, which were designed for pure speed. They were long and slim, but with deep, bulging hulls that could carry tons of cargo like grains, spices, and wool. Now, the shape of the clipper's hull was carried over to passenger ships of the era. In fact, if you compare the stern of an 1800s clipper like Cutty's Sark with that of Titanic from around 40 or 50 years later, you'll see some striking similarities. In fact, even the cross-section of both ships shows those similarities, even though Titanic was almost 50 times larger than Cutty's Sark. A ship's shape had become standardized and formulaic. Typically, to heighten the ship's speed, they featured sharp lines at the front, a bow or forward end designed to easily slice through the ocean as neatly as possible. But in the early 1900s, the world's navies accidentally stumbled across something rather strange. At the turn of the century, warships with rams below the waterline were a huge fad, because it was thought they could destroy an enemy ship faster by colliding with them than just shooting at them. Battleships were built with huge, jutting rams, which did exactly as they were supposed to, but they had an unexpected, weird benefit. Tests showed that warships with rams actually moved more efficiently through the water. That is to say, their engines didn't need to work as hard and burn as much fuel to go as fast. US naval architect David W. Taylor first proposed what he called a bulbous forefoot with the USS Delaware, the battleship from 1910, which featured what looked like a ram, but which was actually something else entirely. Now, Taylor had tested his models at the US Navy Experimental Model Basin, and the results were sufficient for the US Navy to incorporate them in their new battleship. Now, it would take some years yet for the bulbous bow to catch on, specifically in the late 1920s, with Germany's introduction of the Oceanliners Bremen and Europa, speed demons of their age, and both featuring prominent bulbous bows. So what was happening that created such efficiency from the bulbous bow? Well, we know that unlike traditional bows that cut through the water with a sharp leading edge, the bulbous bow extends forward below the waterline. Now, as a ship moves through the water, it displaces that water around its hull, creating a system of waves that include both bow and stern waves. Now, these waves are a form of energy expenditure and contribute significantly to the resistance a ship experiences while it moves, known as wave-making resistance. The larger and faster the ship, the more pronounced these effects can be, leading to increased fuel consumption and poor efficiency. The ship simply has to work harder to propel itself through the ocean. But the bulbous bow works by exploiting some of these principles. As the bulbous bow moves through the water, it creates its own set of waves. Now, when designed correctly for a ship's typical operating speed and displacement, the waves generated by the bulbous bow intersect with the waves created by the ship's main bow behind them in such a way that they cancel each other out through something called destructive interference. More specifically, the troughs of the waves generated by the bulbous bow align with the crests of the bow waves, leading to a reduction in overall wave height. Now, this wave cancellation effect significantly reduces the wave-making resistance encountered by the ship. With lower resistance, the ship requires less power to maintain its speed, leading to improvements in fuel efficiency and allowing for higher speeds or longer ranges on the same amount of fuel. Now, this is particularly effective at the ship's designed cruising speed, where the phase and amplitude of the waves are precisely tuned for optimal interference. Now, Taylor had figured this out way back in the early 1900s, but it would take even more time for the bulbous bow to evolve as designers and builders became more daring. Early bulbous bows were teardrop-shaped and subtle. Everything from ocean liners to battleships like Bismarck featured this style of bow. But years after World War II, the bow began to evolve even further. The shape became more pronounced, more bulbous. The effects on drag reduction were even more dramatic. Today, bulbous bows are huge. Queen Mary II's is about the length of a small yacht itself. The effectiveness of the bulbous bow is highly dependent on its shape, size, and the speed of the ship, and it's most efficient at specific speeds and loading conditions. Now, naval architects designed the bow with those factors in mind, tailoring its dimensions to the ship's specific operational profile. So the bulbous bow's size and the angle at which it protrudes are critical in determining how the generated wave will interact with the bow wave. At speeds lower or higher than the ship's design speed, the gains from that bulbous bow actually diminish. See, at low speeds, the bulb may even increase resistance thanks to increased surface area and frictional drag. Now, this design peculiarity means that the bulbous bow is best suited for vessels that operate at a relatively constant speed, like cargo ships and cruise ships. Now, obviously, in an era where fuel efficiency and environmental impact are of the paramount concern, the bulbous bow and the efficiency that it offers are a big deal. By reducing the wave-making resistance, ships consume less fuel, leading to lower emissions of greenhouse gases and pollutants. This makes the bulbous bow a surprising, essential feature in the drive towards more sustainable maritime operations. In fact, the concept of the bulbous bow continues to evolve, even to this day, with advances in computational fluid dynamics and experimental hydrodynamics. Researchers and naval architects are pushing engineering to its limits, using these tools to refine bulb designs, making them more effective across a broader range of speed and conditions. Testing's being done on variable bulbous bows that can actually be adjusted, repositioned to optimize performance for changing load conditions and speeds. This would mean that, say, if a ship were going far slower than its cruising speed, the bulb could actually be retracted, reducing drag and overcoming that increased friction that we talked about earlier. Newer cruise ships like Celebrity Edge have removed the protruding bulbous bow entirely, opting instead for an inverted bow that slopes backwards, a move that provides a longer waterline with less drag, but which also results in a ship more likely to take waves over the bow. It's an interesting move, and we'll see if it catches on. Like it or loathe it, the bulbous bow is here to stay. By reducing wave-making resistance through the strategic use of wave interference, the bulbous bow has enhanced fuel efficiency, reduces environmental impact, and improves the operational performance of ships. Unfortunately, it just looks a little bit weird. But that's okay, because when you're up top on your cruise ship, sipping pina coladas and getting caught in the rain, the bulbous bow and its efficiencies should probably be the last thing on your mind anyway. Lifeboats. You've probably seen them dozens of times on ships without giving them too much thought, but in an emergency, they'd be your best friend. These little guys, and to be fair, some actually aren't that little, are the last lifeline for those in danger at sea. Today, we have stringent controls on the number and type of lifeboats that ships can have, from the massive, heavy passenger-carrying boats from cruise ships to the crash-launching, rapid-release boats found on cargo vessels. How do these clever machines work? Well, today we'll take a look at the history of lifeboats, from their days as simple, open-top wooden boats to the advanced pieces of technology that they are today. So when did mariners first start using lifeboats? Well, it seems like the obvious thing to do. If your ship runs into trouble, then you'll need to get away somehow. But the truth is, ships' boats weren't always originally focused on saving lives at sea. Ships of the 17th century, such as those belonging to the Dutch East India Company, carried smaller boats that could be used in emergencies, but these weren't lifeboats in the modern sense, rather small boats intended for various uses, including ship-to-shore transport. There were many different kinds of boats for lots of different jobs, ranging from cutters, which were broad and large for transporting goods from shore to ship, all the way to gigs, long and fast for quickly rowing the captain ashore. Back then, if your ship was lost at sea in combat or in a storm, very little thought was given to salvation or rescue. It was a foregone conclusion that ships lost in a storm would be lost with their crews as well. The ship was all they had. The real impetus for the development of the lifeboat came in the 18th century, particularly in Britain, where shipwrecks along the coast prompted efforts to improve maritime safety. In 1789, Lionel Lucan patented the first design for an unsinkable rescue boat, featuring a wooden frame covered with copper and buoyant materials like cork. The idea was for these boats to be based in stations ashore, where wrecks often happened, manned by dedicated crews who would row out if disaster struck and rescue as many people as they could. Now, the new type of vessel was given a new name, the lifeboat. Although Lucan's design was a significant step forward, it was actually Henry Greathead who is often credited with constructing the first modern lifeboat in 1790. His boat, named Original, featured an iron keel, watertight compartments, and cork for buoyancy. Crucially, it was also self-righting, an essential feature for a boat designed to operate in rough seas. If the boat was flipped in heavy waves, it would, in theory, turn itself upright again. The Royal National Lifeboat Institution, established in the UK in 1824, played a pivotal role in advancing lifeboat design and deployment, saving countless lives over the years. The lifeboat crews were very brave, and they participated in many impressive rescues. But soon, naval planners began to cotton onto the idea of taking the design features of those shore-based lifeboats and including them on the boats carried by larger ships at sea. With the adoption of passenger steamships in the mid-1800s, the size and passenger complement of those ships began to steadily increase. Fare-paying passengers expected a layer of safety. In those days, going to sea meant you were taking a gamble because often ships would never reach their destination and even simply disappear at sea. The appearance of lifeboats aboard ships at least presented a veil of hope for rescue. Throughout the 19th century, several innovations improved lifeboat design and function. Now, one notable invention was the self-bailing lifeboat, which featured mechanisms that removed water that entered the boat, thus increasing its survivability in heavy seas. Now, lifeboats then were typically wooden, big, and heavy, 30 feet or more long, capable of holding some 40 to 70 people. They had big buoyancy tanks fitted in to help with the flotation, but in a heavy, raging sea, the boats were still as good as sunk. They were open-topped, easily flooded or capsized. Not only that, but the way lifeboats were lowered from clunky cranes called radial davits meant that they might not even reach the water safely in the first place. Now, even worse, ships of the time infamously carried fewer lifeboats than the total number of passengers and crew on board. Now, this came to the attention of the public in 1912. The sinking of RMS Titanic marked a watershed moment for lifeboats and maritime safety regulations. The disaster highlighted the insufficient number of lifeboats on board the ship and led to the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, or SOLAS, in 1914. The simple truth was that ships had just exploded in size and the regulations had not kept up at all. SOLAS established strict lifeboat requirements for all ships, including the provision of enough lifeboats or life-saving capacity for all passengers and crew, lifeboat drills, and other safety measures. Throughout the 20th century, lifeboat design continued to evolve. Finally, the boats shifted from wood to steel and aluminium, making them much more durable and easier to launch. But it also meant they could grow in size. In 1912, one of Titanic's lifeboats could carry about 65 people. By 1936, Queen Mary's boats could carry 145. And not only that, but the old radial davit cranes were finally gone. These were rickety and relied on crew members to let the rope lines or falls out by hand, resulting in a jerky, uneven release for the boat. Not so fun when passengers were swinging 6 or more stories above the ocean's surface. The gravity davit was a clever device that could actually store the lifeboats up on deck, easily swing out, and then use gravity and electric winches to smoothly and automatically lower the boats over the side. Critically, lifeboats began to receive their own propulsion. First steam engines and then diesel, so they could easily motor to safety, and even wireless radio sets so that they could communicate with the outside world. Old wooden-top lifeboats, if they had got away from a sinking ship, often went days or even weeks before a rescue ship happened to stumble across them, if they ever did at all. The new technological developments meant that lifeboats stood a greater and greater chance of being discovered. Today, lifeboats have changed a lot, and they're actually part of a larger, comprehensive life-saving system, which includes life rafts, personal flotation devices, and sophisticated emergency and evacuation procedures. Modern ships' lifeboats are really marvels of design in and of themselves, reflecting decades and decades of lessons learned the hard way. They're built to withstand extreme conditions, ensuring the safety of occupants until rescue. The design features and construction of these lifeboats are governed by those rigorous international regulations, including those sent forth by SOLAS. Modern lifeboats are commonly constructed from robust, lightweight materials like fiberglass reinforced plastic, FRP, or aluminium. Now, these materials are chosen for their durability, their resistance to corrosion, and their ability to withstand the harsh marine environment. FRP in particular offers excellent strength-to-weight ratios and is totally safe from the corrosive effects of saltwater and the harsh marine environment. Aluminium, while also resistant to corrosion, provides a lighter alternative, which can be crucial for the overall weight of the lifeboat and its launching system. Now, the construction of a modern lifeboat is a meticulous process that involves assembling multiple layers of materials to create the hull, installing the internal components and systems, and rigorous testing to ensure it all meets maritime safety standards. In fact, each lifeboat is like its own little ship, and quality control is paramount, with each lifeboat undergoing extensive inspections and even sea trials before being deemed ready for installation. Some of the key areas of the way modern lifeboats are designed and built can be broken down into these facets. First of all, buoyancy and stability. The lifeboats are designed with built-in buoyancy, either through the use of buoyant materials within the hull or through watertight compartments and tanks that can prevent sinking even if part of the hull is breached. Stability is a critical design consideration, with many lifeboats capable of righting themselves if they're capsized. Second of all, they feature an enclosed structure. To protect occupants from the elements, modern lifeboats are often fully enclosed. Now, this design feature is crucial for survival in extreme weather conditions, providing shelter from wind, rain, and sea spray, but enclosures also offer protection against hazards like fire or falling objects in the event of an industrial accident at sea. Third of all is the safety and survival equipment. Ships' lifeboats are equipped with all manner of essential survival gear. They're like a floating Swiss Army knife. Lifeboats contain supplies like fresh water, food rations, first aid kits, thermal protective aids, and seasickness bags, but they're also fitted with navigation and communication devices like GPS, VHF radios, and even sometimes radar reflectors, or emergency positioning indicating radio beacons or EPIRBs to aid in rescue operations. Fourth of all is the capacity and seating arrangements. Now, the overall capacity of a lifeboat is actually calculated based off of simple mathematics based around the number of people on board the main vessel, and this is all regulated, of course, by SOLAS regulations. Now, seating is designed to maximize space while also ensuring the safety and comfort of the occupants. Because of the lightweight, strong, modern materials we have access to, lifeboats have become much larger and therefore more stable and safe. Queen Mary 2's lifeboats can carry some 150 passengers each in much greater safety than her predecessors' boats. Fifth of all are the launch and recovery systems. Lifeboats are equipped with launching systems designed for quick and safe deployment. Now, these can include gravity davits, freefall systems for rapid deployment, we'll get back to that in a minute, and recovery systems that allow the lifeboat to be safely hoisted back onto the ship after use. Now, I mentioned earlier that the gravity davit had greatly improved the lowering procedures for ships' boats back in the 1930s, but it was so influential that modern passenger ships still use them. Constructed typically from high-strength steel or aluminium, gravity davits are engineered to withstand the harsh marine environment and the dynamic loads experienced during launch. Now, this is no mean feat because a fully loaded ship's lifeboat, like the 150-person boats from Queen Mary 2, can weigh up to 24 US tons. Now, the davits consist of immensely strong arms that can hold the lifeboat safely stowed in place while docked or at sea, and then a winch system with brakes that can control the descent of the lifeboat into the water when it's required. The winch ensures that the lifeboat can be lowered smoothly and at a controlled speed, even in adverse sea conditions or against the listing of a sinking ship. But in addition to lowering lifeboats, gravity davits are designed for efficient retrieval, allowing lifeboats to be hoisted back onto the ship easily after use. Now, this is accomplished through a manual or powered winch system which pulls the lifeboat back into its stowed position, ready for future deployment. This is really important because today, on passenger ships, the lifeboats are used for a special dual purpose, ferrying passengers ashore on excursions. If the ship can't dock, passengers will board the lifeboats, called tenders, which will actually run them safely to their destination and back again. This gives passengers the rare opportunity to see a modern ship's lifeboats in action. But the gravity davit can take time and care to lower away successfully. Now, this isn't a problem on big passenger ships that would take considerable time to sink. But on bulk carriers and tankers, it presents a problem. These monsters of the deep have very little margin for buoyancy. Loaded down with all that dead weight, in an emergency they could sink in just minutes, leaving absolutely no time at all to ready and lower the lifeboats. A series of tragic losses led to the introduction of a special kind of emergency boat, the free-fall lifeboat. Free-fall lifeboats are constructed with robust, reinforced structure capable of withstanding the hard impact of hitting the water from a significant height without compromising the boat's integrity or the safety of its occupants. They're typically made from the same high-strength materials like fiberglass reinforced plastic or aluminium, and the hull is designed with a streamlined shape to facilitate a smooth and stable launch when the boat free falls into the water. The interior of a free-fall lifeboat is equipped with shock-absorbing seating and safety harnesses to protect passengers during the launch. The essence of the free-fall lifeboat's functionality lies in its radical launch mechanism. Instead of being slowly lowered with davits, a free-fall lifeboat is essentially released from a ramp and literally free falls into the sea. Now, this launch system consists of a launching ramp, which is inclined at an angle to the water, and a release mechanism that holds the lifeboat in place at the top of the ramp. When an emergency evacuation is necessary, the crew and passengers board the lifeboat, secure themselves safely in their seats, and close the watertight door behind them. The coxswain, or the person in charge of navigating and operating the lifeboat, then activates a release brake, causing the lifeboat to slide quickly down the ramp and drop into the water in seconds, away from the ship or platform. And one of the key features of the freefall boat is its self-righting capability. The lifeboat might enter the water upside down. Its design will allow it to right itself automatically, ensuring that it's always in the correct orientation. Additionally, the lifeboat's fully enclosed, providing protection against fire, smoke, high seas, and other extreme conditions. Operating a free-fall boat requires specific training and regular drills to ensure that crew members are familiar with the unusual procedures and can execute them quickly and efficiently. Now, obviously, it's a bone-jarring ride for occupants, and probably not one I'd be willing to do for fun. But in dire situations where seconds count, it's the difference between life and death. It might surprise you to know that modern-day passenger ships only require fully enclosed lifeboats for about 75% of the ship's company. The remaining 25% are tended to by life rafts and inflatables. In fact, ships are fitted with special automatically inflatable rafts that will deploy as soon as the ship sinks around them. Over the years, the primary function of lifeboats has remained unchanged, to provide a safe means of evacuating people from a ship in distress. Now, this includes not only passengers and crew, but also, in some cases, survivors of other disasters at sea. Today, lifeboats are big, impressive pieces of technology, but they're not immune to danger. If a ship's list to one side during a sinking exceeds 15 or 20 degrees, it could become difficult or even impossible to lower the boats at all. Fortunately, modern safety features like radar and advanced navigation systems have lessened the need for lifeboats at all, but passengers can rest assured that if they ever need them, modern ships' lifeboats are more than equipped to handle the job. Think of a ship's name, and chances are you'd want to impulsively put the prefix SS at the start. After all, it's just what ships are called. But why? Well, the truth is, not all ships are created equal, and that little SS title doesn't apply to many ships today at all. Prefixes have been used before ships' names to denote their role, their nationality, and whether or not they're carrying mail. Random, I know. SS, TSS, HMS, ARA, USS, RMMV, XQJKLIV. Okay, I made that last one up. They've all adorned ships' names, and they all mean vastly different things. So where does SS come from? Well, it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that the second S in the abbreviation stands for ship. Creative, I know. And that first one has a lot to do with the way ships back in the 18 and 1900s were powered. Steam was the absolute game changer that interrupted the way the world had worked forever. See, before steam, things were way more difficult. Things couldn't be easily mass-produced. Goods cost a lot, but with steam engines, the Industrial Revolution could take hold. Suddenly, countless variations of tools and machines could run off of steam power, and so could ships. The steamship became the standard way to cross the world's oceans, but not overnight. It took time to take off, because when first introduced, people were less than impressed. See, for centuries, ships had been wind-powered, and sail had become a craft that humans had mastered the hard way. Sailing ships were fast and trusted. Generations of sailors had learnt their craft and were deeply respected. So you can only imagine that when these weird, chugging machines came along belching smoke and looking ungainly, most people laughed them off as a curiosity. Soon, steamships began to take hold as their benefit became well known, and they proved themselves as a serious way to cross the ocean. But operators knew that they had to make their ships stand out from the pack. Passengers making bookings on ships across the Atlantic might be dismayed, for example, to trek out to their trusted sailing ship, only to discover at the last minute, and to their horror, that it was actually a steamship instead. Steamship operators began to look to the Royal Navy in the way that they had set their ships apart for decades by the use of a prefix. The ships of the Royal Navy had been denoted by the prefix HMS, which stood for His or Her Majesty's ship, since the 1770s or 1780s. Early on, it hadn't been considered necessary, but in lengthy reports, when repeatedly writing His Majesty's ship, such and such, which had been tradition since at least the 1600s, over and over again, it became a chore. Swapping in the simple abbreviation HMS became the done thing, and soon it became standardized and all warships of the Royal Navy became known as HMS something or other. Steamship operators did the same thing. This new class of ship got its own prefix, SS, steamship, to mark it out from its sail-driven contenders.
But this wasn't enough, because it turns out that marking your ship out through the use of prefixes could actually give away a lot of very useful information as to the characteristics of your ship. And with the passage of time, prefixes have only got more and more convoluted and complicated. Let's take a look at some.
The easiest to explain is probably the prefix USS. If you're from the United States, you'll be familiar with this one. It stands simply for United States Ship, and is used for ships of the US Navy. USS, as a prefix, is only surprisingly modern. There'd been no official regulation for prefixes in the US Navy until as late as 1907, when Theodore Roosevelt standardized it and made it official. Many of the world's navies actually followed suit. The United Kingdom already had HMS, sure, but then there are so many others, like ARA for the Argentine Navy. It stands for Armada de la República Argentina, Or in the First World War, the German and Austrian SMS, Seine Majestat Schiff, or His Majesty's Ship, basically the German version of HMS. Some are very unoriginal, like the Australian Navy with HMAS, His Majesty's Australian Ship, or New Zealand with HMNZS. No points for guessing what that stands for.
Now, obviously, this is very useful at determining at a glance what nationality that warship belongs to, but it has presented some issues.
German and Japanese warships in the Second World War did not use prefixes, and in fact, the German Navy still does not use one for its warships. Now, obviously, this can be a bit confusing, so historians and enthusiasts have given German and Japanese warships from the Second World War their own creative prefixes after the fact. For Germany, it's KMS or DKM, KM meaning Kriegsmarine, or the German Navy of the Second World War, so KMS, Kriegsmarine ship, or DKM, Deutsches Kriegsmarine, or German Navy. For Japan, it's IJN, the Imperial Japanese Navy. To mark out that some ships were hospital ships of a certain nationality, then the letter H could be slipped in. So for example, in HMHS for His Majesty's or Her Majesty's Hospital Ship for Great Britain. And for a time, the US had USAHS for United States Army Hospital Ship. That might have been too convoluted because that prefix is out of use today. Instead, US Navy ships that are crewed with civilians and not properly commissioned are prefixed with USNS for United States Naval Ship. Confusing, I know. The US Coast Guard gets its own fancy prefix with USCGC, or United States Coast Guard Cutter, with cutter being a type of ship. So that's simple enough. Prefixes used in relation to warships give you their nationality up front. But for merchant ships, things have gotten even more complicated, because remember I said that earlier steamships used SS to make themselves stand out from their sailing ship brethren? Well, you can only imagine how confusing things got when new methods of propulsion were added, and since it wasn't regulated or enforced, all sorts of different prefixes began to pop up. One such famous example is that of Titanic, where, on different posters and material, Titanic is variously referred to as SS Titanic, RMS Titanic, or TSS Titanic. Let me explain. Titanic was naturally a steamship, so when delivered as new from her owners, she was referred to as Steamship Titanic, or SS Titanic. But then something interesting happened. The ship, after proving herself at her sea trials, was awarded a contract to carry Royal Mail on board. Now, this was a lucrative contract, and it was usually awarded to the fastest and most prestigious British steamers. This was a big deal for a shipping company back then, because to carry Royal Mail was a sign of trust, reliability, and, above all, speed. Now, winning such a contract came with some benefits, including the right to fly the Royal Mail pennant, but it also came with its own prefix, RMS, or Royal Mail Ship. So Titanic transformed from SS to RMS. But weirdly, in other documentation you can find Titanic referred to as TSS. So what's that about? Well, this is where ships' prefixes got tangled and sometimes confusing because shipbuilders and operators began to use the prefix as a way to show the kind of machinery that the ship had down below. Back in the days of sail, the various classes of sailing ship were obsessively sorted and memorized by captains and seamen. Frigates, sloops, barks, clippers, chebecks, brigs, sloops, the list goes on and on. So, it stands to reason that by the time steamships came around, the tradition would continue. Now, prefixes began to denote the kinds of machinery and the number of propellers the ship carried. Lusitania was a ship with 4 propellers and turbine steam engines. Her prefix on many postcards and documentation from her construction refers to her as QSTS Lusitania, quadruple screw turbine ship. Now, Titanic was often referred to as TSS Titanic, but the truth is there's some argument over what TSS actually stands for, with contenders being triple screw steamship or more simply turbine steamship, since she also carried a turbine alongside her conventional expansion steam engines. Now either way, the point of the story is that soon prefixes began to get out of hand and became more and more strange. As the steam engine fell out of use and the diesel engine rose in popularity, the prefix MV became the norm. MV, which stands for motor vessel, because a motor is different to a steam engine. Early on, motor ships were actually denoted as MS, motor ship, but in the end, ship was swapped out for vessel, and MV became standard. Dominion Monarch was a big old motor ship from the Shaw Savile line. She got their QSMV prefix for quadruple screw motor vessel. That was a weird one. Then there were other modes of propulsion, like turbo-electric ships, that got their own prefixes too, like QTEV, quadruple screw turbine electric vessel. In a funny twist of fate, it became necessary to mark sailing ships out as unique, since now there had become so few of them by the late 20th century, SV or sailing vessel, and SY for sailing yachts. Now there's a whole host of ship prefixes that can give you a ton of information, but things have become more streamlined, more standardized. Modern ship prefixes aren't focused on the number of propellers that ship carries. If things were as complicated as they used to be back then the liner, Queen Mary 2, would be referred to correctly today as probably something like QSRMGTMV Queen Mary 2, or quadruple screw male gas turbine motor vessel. But she isn't.
Now hopefully the last few minutes haven't felt like I've just been barking acronyms at you. But it just goes to show that the prefix has become a very useful and simple way of determining any kinds of information about a ship that you might need at a glance.
If you're a tugboat captain hanging around the stern of the QSMV Dominion Monarch back in the 1950s, then I'm sure you'd be glad to know just from the prefix that there were 4 big propellers down there for you to try and steer clear of, and not just 2. For decades, the prefix used for ships was not standardized, and some pretty weird ones seem to pop up every now and then, but with time, this too has become the norm, and now an impressive array of prefixes are still in use. There are very few SSs around because the steamship has fallen out of use, and even the old RMS ships are mostly gone because now mail is just carried by airplanes. Still, it's nice that when the last great ocean liner, Queen Mary 2, was built back in the early 2000s, she was given a prefix by the Royal Mail that was a nod to her history and pedigree. RMS Queen Mary 2, possibly the last ship to ever be given the honour and the end of a long and prestigious line. And I'm sure that we can all agree that RMS sounds a lot better than QSRM GTMV.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we get new videos out weekly. If you want to support my work and get really cool perks like behind the scenes and early access, please visit my Patreon in the link in the description below, or sign up as a YouTube member. Come and join the crew. As always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.